It's recording.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
This is a talk about a little known person whose life has influenced ours in these last decades more than we actually know. And so Daniel Rudd, I have found him to be an intriguing figure, and I discovered him specifically when I was doing a talk a couple of years ago on the history of the Black Catholic Church. And there's a little bit about him in Cyprian Davis's book on the history of the Black Catholic Church. And that kept drawing me into his life. So I think that if we're talking about Black Catholic saints, Black Catholics on the road to sainthood, I would think that he would be one in his own right. So that's how much I think, how important I think he is. So you're going to see only a few pictures of him because there's about 3 photos and then people have made paintings out of it. So it's just going to be this same picture over and again. And I apologize for that, but there's hardly any images of him. So let's see what we're going to do next. Okay, so first I want to just say, when I say, what's a holy Catholic vision? Holy Catholic, I'm saying that because I think our faith calls us to a particular kind of life and practice that we, it's not just, have I made it to church on Sunday and fulfilled my obligations, but how do I live that out? So when I did my last talk on Dorothy Day and Peter Marin, I called that the Holy Catholic Vision. Their vision was of people who, a place where the church, where the poor are cared for and given the same kind of dignity that everyone is given, that money is not a determiner of how you're treated at church, and that our practices as Catholics involves us in the lives of all people of all social statuses. Daniel Rudd had a holy Catholic vision, and his vision was of an integrated church where Black, white, for him it would have been Indian, so indigenous peoples, all people were welcomed equally at the table of the Lord. And he carried that vision at a most unusual time when he was just coming out of the life of slavery. How could someone who had been enslaved as a person, as a young person, come to this kind of vision and hold it for so long in his life? I mean, that's what draws me back to him again and again. So how much does being Catholic affect our way of looking at the world? I mean, if we just go about our business and we have this on our, list of things, okay, like our, MBA and our, PhD and our Catholic tag, but we don't act on it. What does the gospel call us to do and to be? And when we talk about the universal church, which is what Catholic means, how are we living in a way that shows the universality of the church for all people? And having been at a meeting just yesterday, we were talking about the immigrants. I'm really proud that our church, that our Catholic bishops have spoken about the importance of the church's engagement with immigrants and care for them. So that's where I'm starting this talk off. So he's got so many good quotes, and that's because he's an editor. He was an editor of a paper for a good part of his career. And so he said a lot of things. He didn't get his picture in the paper, but he did say a lot of things. So the Catholic Church is the only one where rich and poor, white and Black, must drop prejudice at the threshold and go hand in hand to the altar. If only we were doing that today. Today, we have not lived his vision yet. And I'm going to see if this will play, and if not, I'll skip it. See if I can. I have to fix something. In order for Kate to hear, I have to share the sound too. Okay, I think you're going to hear this now. Come on.
Brothers and sisters, the very fact that we are assembled at the 11th National Congress of Black Catholics in the United States indicates that we are heirs to a legacy. Indeed, I consider myself the beneficiary of a revolution. But putting that aside for the moment, let's consider the legacy we've inherited. The National Black Catholic Congresses are the first and oldest assemblies of lay Catholics in the United States. As we all know, their original proponent was a man named Daniel Rudd, who'd been born as a slave and became the publisher of a national black Catholic newspaper. And Daniel Rudd was a firm believer that the Catholic Church was the single great hope for African Americans. Indeed, that all black folk should be Catholic. And to that end, in 1888, 25 years after emancipation, he proposed that black Catholics hold a general congress so that they might get to know one another and, as he put it, take up the cause of the race.
Daniel Rudd was an exceptional human being. He represents so many of our lay people as someone who lived out his faith and didn't just talk about it, but actually lived it in terms of gathering so many people to come together back in 1889 to talk about what really matters to being black and Catholic.
We are the Catholic Church. We're everyone's church. We're the church to which all people and all nations are invited and from which all Christian denominations are derived. Our church is the one church built by Jesus Christ on the apostles. We are the mystical body of Christ. Why stay a Catholic? Why in the world would we want to be anything else?
Now that is Daniel Rudd speaking from the grave. He felt exactly like that. Why would you not want to be a Catholic? Why would every person not want to be a Catholic? So I think I put my talk in this order, but we'll see. I was juggling the slides so much it may be different. Can you see?
Yeah.
I'm kind of in your way, I feel like. Okay, so
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't understand why he thought everybody should be Catholic when the Catholic Church was so silent. Yeah. In the face of the oppression of the black people. Yeah.
let's see.
Oh, good.
Let's see. So we're going to look at his early life as an enslaved person, his understanding of Catholicism as a remedy to racism, and crossing the racial divide. Talking about him as the founder of the American Catholic Tribune and the inventor of the Black Catholic Congress. And by the way, that was a speech from the Black Catholic Congress, which has been revived. So there were 5 of them in Rudd's day, and then they have been revived in the last 2 decades. And now we've had, they were revived in the 1980s, but we, now they meet every 5 years. So the next one will be 2028. Anyway, and he had later years when he was in Mississippi. So, so what is his legacy? So that's what I'm hoping we're going to talk about in that order. And so you can see I've said Daniel Rudd was a lifelong Catholic who believed that the church held the answer to the problem of racial inequity in post-Civil War United States. And I think just to begin to loop that question that you have, Kathy, he understood the church better than we do. He understood the message of Christ and saw it contained in the church and believed that if the church would wake up, this, because Jesus' message is one of equality, right? So he believed in that so fully. Let's see. So just a little bit of history. Pope Gregory in our church, the 16th did condemn the slave trade in 1839. So slavery was still going on in the United States when he condemned it. And the interpretation of that in the United States, even among some Catholic bishops, like these four, was that he was condemning the Atlantic slave trade, in other words, of kidnapping people in Africa and bringing them to the United States, but was not, the bishop said, well, he's not saying we can't keep the slaves we already have, and by the way, propagate slavery because we are, because slaves are giving birth to more slaves, increasing our number of slaves. That's the way some Catholic bishops looked at that, from Charleston to Baltimore, to Louisiana and Florida. All of those bishops were still trying to negotiate how they could hear what the Pope said and not do what the Pope said. There were people in the United States who were against slavery, and some of them, Daniel O'Connell, who fought for emancipation as a layperson, and Claude Maistre, who preached against it as a French priest in New Orleans, and he was suspended as a priest for that. Yikes. So the Catholic Church has made statements in support of slavery since early days, and that's a whole nother talk, remember? But even Augustine has something, trying to understand how some people could be different, and or their gender or their genetics could be different, or maybe because they owe somebody something, they've been captured in a war. So our church has not overtly against slavery, at least continuously. There have been popes who have, people who've spoken out, but generally the first real statement was that one by Pope Gregory, and then of course Leo XIII actually definitively said slavery is wrong, absolutely wrong. There should never be an enslaved person, and we could look at that whole document, but that was in 1888, and Rudd was already 34 by that time. I think that this statement had to have meant, Rudd had to say, our church is speaking, our church is doing something, and what a church we have, that they would say this absolutely. I brought maps because I love maps. This is, and it helps me to understand. So this is a map. I don't know if you can see very well. Kentucky right here, West Virginia, Ohio. But Rudd was born in Bardstown. Okay? And that's where he's buried as well. He came back home at the end of his life. But Bardstown was one of the first dioceses outside of in this area. It was proclaimed a diocese just around I think I've got the date on the next slide, but remember that the United States was a whole diocese for a while, at least all that was in the United States or colonial area. California was not part of the United States. That was a different diocese, but it was owned by, the Spanish diocese. Florida was so this came from Baltimore. So the diocese extended all the way down here and around, and Bardstown for at least a while was the head of the diocese. So Daniel was born in 1854. He was a child of enslaved people, and he was one of 11. And I think he was the second youngest, wasn't the youngest. So he had siblings who were almost a generation older than him. His father was enslaved by somebody named Richard Rudd, and that's where Daniel and the family name came from his father's enslavement in the Rudd plantation. Daniel's mother, Eliza, is listed as mulatto, which means that she was mixed race. And you can draw conclusions from that, but that probably means that she was molested by her owner. And so Daniel is also called mulatto. We have some plantation records and some, population records. Daniel was actually listed as a property. As a 4-year-old, he was worth $250. So, yeah, he was born on at Anatoc, which is the plantation you're looking at right here. And Matilda and Charles Hayden were children. I think Matilda was a child of Rudd, a daughter of Rudd. And so when he died, the slaves were split apart. So there were 16, I think, on Rudd's property, and we don't know by name who went where, but there is a record that a mother and some children were moved to, or were inherited by this family. So that's how he got to be here. And this house was within sight of the cathedral. This is what it looks like still today. The Basilica of St. Joseph, that's the proto-cathedral, because eventually the diocese head was moved to Louisville, Kentucky, but so it still has this proto-cathedral because it was the first cathedral before, and the first head of the diocese. And so this was Daniel's first parish, and I'm going to step over here so I can tell you a little bit more about it. So St. Joseph was built started in 1816. So by the time Daniel was born, this is fully built. And it was built at the request of the head of the Baltimore diocese, who is John Carroll. Remember, that's the first diocese. He's the first bishop of Baltimore. And so there was then Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Bardstown were the heads of the diocese, and of course, Baltimore. So eventually the head of the diocese was moved to Louisville, but Bardstown had this beautiful cathedral. And this is, again, right in sight of where Daniel grew up. And he was baptized and received his sacraments there. And he writes about that. He has fond memories. His parents and his older brothers worked as sextons, which I think is a, like a sacristan kind of job. So they volunteered here. He grew up in this church, and he says, I knew it from pinnacle to the basement. I knew the church. So this is his familiar first real place of safety. And he says, the editor, he's referring to himself when he wrote this in his paper, was baptized in August 1854 at the same font where all the rest, white and black, were baptized without any discrimination, except who got there first. So he had an experience in this little town of feeling safe and wanted and not discriminated against. And here's the interior. The pastor, whose name was John Verdon, was the one who taught. He was a German, and he taught Daniel German and English and taught him to read. I think he had a pretty fond relationship with him, and he even writes about running into him later in his life and them having this deep love and acquaintance with one another. So this pastor and his experience in this little town, despite his being enslaved, was not one of feeling beaten down or so I think that was where he was rooted. So I'll just read this sentence. The editor of the Tribune, that's him again, made his first communion there after the long course of study and instruction one must go through prior to that event. And during the time, he and all the other colored and white children sat together when the late Venerable Archbishop Spalding, then Bishop of Louisville, administered the sacrament of confirmation. The tribute man knelt beside as fair a damsel as ever bowed before that rail and thought nothing of it. You see, he's imagining, he's remembering, I was not treated differently. I received communion with people, white people. And excuse me for this, the word colored was the common word at the time. He did not, he felt I was just like everybody else. That's how he grew up. So he found things a little different when he got out into the world. But that's the memory, that's what was deeply embedded in him, this connection between faith and safety and non-discrimination. Just wanted to remind you that during this time, the Civil War was going on. There were two battles in 1862 and 1863 that were fought in Bardstown. So despite what sounds like an idyllic life, kneeling at the altar with every other child, there was a war going on and battles right there in his town. And because of that, his mother decided to get him out of town and across the Kentucky border into Ohio. So at the time, his brother, a much older brother, old enough to be off on his own, was living in Springfield, Ohio. So here that is. So look, here's Bardstown right about here and Springfield up here. And so he became an Ohioan, which is yay for me because that's where I'm from, Ohio. So Springfield, Ohio was where he went to school as a young teen and then graduated from high school and started off his career, if you will. He started off working there. So let's see. And this was his parish there. When Daniel moved here, he was 10, but he graduated from North High School. He belonged to St. Raphael, which was founded in 1849 by German Catholics. So that was great because he had this German background already. And, that's my background. I'm a German Catholic as well. So, this area was full of German immigrants who came here and who were Catholics. So this was his parish here. And he was also very involved there. And he helped at the parish. And he also began to see that things weren't exactly as he would have liked them to be, because he noticed that there was some fighting over whether, I'm sorry, I'm just going to get my book out with my quote, whether Black children could go to school with white children. Okay. And this was by then 1881. And he decided to be part of a legal action to speak out against that. And he said, he gave a speech at the court case to try to get these two young girls to be able to attend public school with white children. And so he said in his speech, and it was actually published in the Springfield Republic, "It is pleasant and profitable for us to be here as we are tonight to take steps right and proper for our advancement. Last fall, at the opening of the schools, quite a commotion was created in the midst by a little lady, Miss Eva Gazeway, whom I have the pleasure of presenting to you, going to the public school in her district and being refused. Her father, doing as none of our citizens have done heretofore, demanded to know why she may not be admitted as well as her next door neighbor. And he was informed that she was Black." What? Hence the reason for the suit and our presence here tonight. The citizens met and appointed a committee to carry the case, if necessary, to the Supreme Court of the United States. Of individuals, families, and communities, our nation is composed. When all work in harmony and good feeling for the general good of the nation will be secured. This suit is not for Miss Gazaway alone, nor for the rights of the children of this community or state, but for all children. He lost that case. I mean, not he wasn't a lawyer, but the case was lost. But this is where he began to find a role as an activist and to say, if things aren't right, I am going to speak out. I'm going to say something. There's certainly our country is meant to be something different than this. I just want to remind you that in the days after the Civil War, and that was with emancipation in 1865, our country was struggling with what to do with people of color who had been enslaved their whole lives. And like, what do we make of them? Okay. And granting them full citizenship was not just something that you could say poof to. And now I know what full citizenship means, and now you know how to treat me. And so this struggle was in the Reconstruction period was really kind of vital and interesting. And so this is a natural offspring of what's happening after the Civil War, when people who had been enslaved now have a different role in society, and how do we understand that? And it wasn't until the Jim Crow laws that segregation really started to like change the nature of things. But I guess I'm saying that because there was this period in our history that we were not knowing how to react. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are like, no, I'm not going to treat that person like a human being. But I think that our country was trying to come to grips with this. Okay, so Rudd worked for the Sunday News, and then he worked for something called the Review, and then he established Ohio State Tribune. He was working at newspapers as an editor, but in the process, he also knew the printing business, and he decided to start his own paper, the first Black paper printed by and for the Black community. Okay. So there were Black papers, but he would say this is the first one. And he supported his paper by a printing business, because printing the paper, you had the same things. You could print business cards or stationery or other kinds of things, books. So he got into the printing business. And he said at the time, editors shape the very destinies of nations. So again, the optimists, I'm an editor, and editors can have some voice in how the world will go, and I will have that voice. Okay? If the press would unite in teaching man his moral duty, how much less trouble there would be in the affairs of life. So he saw this, like, can you see his Catholic background, his dignity as a person, his connecting with this role as editor, all of that, called him, brought him to this vocation. There is another little video here that it's a little sidebar, but I thought I would share this with you because this is the kind of printing press he would have had.
And here you can see what a small town printing office would look like in Michigan in the 1880s. Over here you can see that we have our imposing table. This is where a skilled printer called a compositor would take pieces of font, like what you see right here, and these would be arranged into composites that can be used to print. And compositing was a very difficult skill to learn. Not every printer got to know how to be one, because not only did you have to know how to read, you had to know how to read backwards. Now, making just one word like this right here, well, this isn't too difficult, especially because it uses such large font. But making something like this plate right here, that would require about 2 hours worth of compositing to go into it. So just imagine doing that for a living, placing each individual letter into its place. And making something even bigger than this, like, say, the sheet of newspaper that you see hanging up behind me to dry, that uses even smaller font and would have taken about 2 days to composite. That's why an office like this could only afford to print out a weekly paper. But at least once you have the composite complete, you can use it again and again as often as you like. And you can take it to a press like this right here, which you can use to make mass copies. And this here is our Washington press, which was a very popular press in America. It was very commonly used from about 1830 to 1900, And for press like this, you can use it to print out just about anything you need. And here you can make schedules for companies, menus for restaurants, even weekly newspapers and entire books. And I can show you how it works. First step of the process is to ink the plate. And you always need to do this for each print, otherwise the letters won't show up on the
Inking
paper
by
as well.
hand.
Now, operating a press like this was commonly the job of two apprentice boys, or possibly a girl. One would ink the plate while the other would have loaded the paper. And now, turning on this once right here, I can slide in the plate and paper under the press proper. And now by pulling on this lever, I just put about 300 pounds of pressure per square inch onto that plate. And now for unrolling it, we get to see how it turned out. And voila, we have our print. And just like that, two apprentices can turn out about 200 to 250 of these in an hour on here. So that's when you're really rolling. It's about 1 every 15 seconds or so. Now it's going to take about 3 or 4 hours for the ink on here to dry. With this humidity and all. So I'm going to take a piece of blotting paper and set it onto here. This way when I roll it up, the ink doesn't smear.
And they had to repeat every time when you said it.
They had to re-ink every page and reset. And so Rudd printed a 4-page paper. It had a weekly paper. So that would, I think it would be it was 4 pages folded like this, big pages. So he probably printed 2 on one side, 2 on the other at the same time. But when he was printing the American Catholic Tribune, which was his major paper, he at one time was printing 10,000 copies. So, so imagine the work, not just writing it, but he's got people who are setting it up, inking it. They've got to proof it and print. They have to have a place to dry. So this is a big printing business that he has, and he will have as he grows into doing the American Catholic Tribune, which is his main newspaper. But he also saw this as a way to give work, to dignified work, to people who were looking for work. And he said he wanted black and white. He wanted all people to be able to work with dignity. So he had a printing shop like that. So he decided to move from Springfield to Cincinnati, and it's hard to know exactly why. We don't know why, but it's a larger city. Okay, it again, a large German background, where he has this background in friendships with Germans, and he set up a business in Cincinnati, and his paper, which was called the Ohio Tribunal, then began to be the American Catholic Tribune. So that paper lasted until from 1885 to 1897. So he had a large amount of, as he began this work, he started to grow his subscriptions. He actually had hired people to go out and to different cities and to take subscriptions. He was well known, not just in Cincinnati, but across the country, and even into the South. Although the author of the book that I read suggested probably he didn't go down to the South as much as you would like, because by the time he was doing this, there was a lot of violence in the South for people of color. So this is called the American Catholic Tribune Act. And it was the only Catholic newspaper owned by an African American. Once again, Ohio, and now the Ohio Tribunal, and now this one. 1992 was the peak of his circulation, 10,000. And he was also involved in many other organizations that have to do with the press. Like, for instance, he was the chair of the Afro-American Press Association. He was well known. He gave talks all around. The more he talked, the more he published, the more he was wanted as a speaker. So he would give talks around the country. He was a member of the Catholic Press Association, which was not solely a Black. So he was in Cincinnati. And as a Cincinnatian, I know that the second Archbishop was William Elder, and he was very much appreciative of what Rudd was doing. He said, I am very much pleased with the great labor you are applying to make the American Catholic Tribune a useful and interesting factor in advancing the best interests, not only of your own immediate people, but of the whole country. Elder became a good friend of Rudd's. And in fact, Rudd knew a lot of the archbishops in the United States at that time, and was on speaking terms with them. I mean, connecting with them and being talked about with them talked to with them because he was writing all these things, advocating for Catholicism. And so just want to say that Rudd held to a view of reading, a Catholic view of reading the past. And what that means is that he looked at the past through the lens of the church and how the church lived in the world and existed in the world. And that really shows that that's a part of how he spoke about the church. So he emphasized the universal and diverse character of the church. He said, once again from his paper, anyone who has read history and given ear to the inevitable conclusions that grow out of its teachings can see at a glance that in the Catholic Church alone is the only permanent advancement to be made. She alone advances steadily, and it is her upward flight which carries her with all the races of mankind on an equal footing. Wow. What a vision. What a vision. He called the church to that vision. I think we're still trailing along, but but he was way in advance of us. He saw the mission of Jesus, the mission of the church, and said, this is where the church is going to take us. He said he also was an evangelist. After the Civil War, there was a drop off from Catholic churches of Black people. They were moving away from the Catholic Church, and perhaps because of its advocacy of slavery in the South at that time. But Rudd felt it was his job to evangelize. So not only was he rooting for the church, but he was out there saying, we Black people, we need to get into the church. All of you do, because this is where we're going to find not only salvation, but integrity and equity. So he said, the Negro of this country, abused and downtrodden and condemned, needs all the forces which may be brought to bear in his behalf to elevate him to the plane of equality. We need it all. We need help because we have been beaten down. The Holy Roman Catholic Church offers to the oppressed Negro a material as well as a spiritual refuge. We need the church. The church wants us. Investigating, brethren. I mean, he's like, get out there. You will find it in the church. So, I mean, oh my gosh, when you see this, you're like, he seems to be the most hopeful person in the United States at this time. And so he was introducing his race to the church that he loved, and introducing and providing the church opportunities to serve and welcome the people who had formerly been enslaved. Rudd traveled all over the place giving speeches, and I'm looking at this in Mobile, Alabama. He came to a church that I find this incredible because I just finished reading a book about the Clotilda, which was the last slave ship, and that was sunk after it delivered enslaved peoples in Mobile. So I'm like incredibly surprised, but he went to Mobile to give a talk, and he said, the color of a man's skin does not bar him from mingling with the whites in this church at the communion rail, nor does it bar him from any seat in that church. He experienced equity in that church. I mean, if he didn't, he surely like is speaking like he did. So he found a place. He's like, well, here I do find it. He believed that the society would become more just if we just paid attention to the teachings of the church. If we just did that. Wowie. This is a nice picture of the Catholic Tribune, just so you can see. Look at how tiny that writing is. So it must have been like this, but still, some advertisements with lots of text. And he did sometimes print an article a second time, like he didn't, like every week he didn't have all new articles. There were some that he repeated, and I read that they thought, oh, he just didn't have enough material to put in. I think he thought, let's just leave that piece of text there, because how much would it be to tear that one out and put another one in? So, but he reports on all these things that he sees, and he believed in integration. And I want to say that because this is a time when Jim Crow laws were talking about separate but equal. Okay, he believed that integration was the answer, not separate but equal. And he saw that as a hope. He said, there's no race problem in this country except as it exists in the pampered prejudices of either narrow-minded, ignorant, or uncharitable people. There is no room in heaven for prejudice. And people had better come to that conclusion here rather than to suffer in the hereafter. That's a little bit strong, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, there's no room for prejudice in heaven, so you better work it out of your system now. Okay. They're too, and this is, I think, the Alabama, sorry, at the church, in the church, not the Alabama church, but in the church. There too may be seeing people of every complexion, from white to black, every tongue spoken in this great cosmopolitan town, every shade of wealth, all kneeling side by side or approaching communion table side by side. And I think that's the thing that I love, is he understood that the Eucharist was the place of unity. He kept noticing people could come together there, even if outside in the world they were not quite as cordial to one another. And that was the place where the playing field was level. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I just wanted to remind you that in 1888, this is in pluribus, it's the document that says that slavery is wrong and should be and must be abolished. That's in the midst of his publishing career, right? So I don't have a record of if he published this document or not, but I can't imagine that he didn't publish Leo the 13th's document saying there is there should be no slavery, unless it's unless it's that he felt that he didn't want to talk about slavery, right? Or talk about his former life as an enslaved person. So I don't have any record that he actually published this, but he did publish this, and this is not till 1891. So toward after he had been publishing for a while, he published this whole thing in 6 parts in his paper, an extraordinary document. And it was the first in a long line of social justice documents. We've talked about this in the past, Rerum Novarum, because it talks about the importance of the laborer and the right of people to have a just wage and to strike, to form unions, and to get what that workers deserve to have a living wage. Okay. I'm sorry, I had to do that. Whoops. Okay, while Rudd was traveling all around the area, he was in Chicago where he befriended Augustus Tolton, who we know is one of the Black Catholics on the road to sainthood. And so should Daniel Rugby. But so we already know a little bit about him. He was born, he's the same age. He was born in 1854, like Rudd, and he was also born an enslaved person. And his mother escaped with him when his father was fighting for the Union Army during the Civil War, and they came east to, he was in Missouri and he came east to Illinois, and was settled there for a while, and became a star pupil, learned some Latin, and was sent to Rome, became a priest, came back to the United States as a priest, ordained. He's the first priest who publicly acknowledged his race and his priesthood. There were a couple of others who were priests and were people of color, but were passing for white. So he was a priest for the Diocese of Alton in Springfield, Illinois, but then he moved to Chicago. And that's where Tolton and Rudd met. Rudd says, yes, now the church has a Black priest. Now, yes, this is our movement forward. He felt it was a watershed moment. And so Rudd went to Chicago to sell papers, among other things, and to give talks. And he ran into Tolton, and Rudd was always trying to raise money for his paper. And Tolton was raising money for a Catholic church. So they supported each other's funds and made friends with each other. And later, when Rudd founded the first National Black Catholic Congress, Tolton was the celebrant at Mass there. So they had a common connection because of their race, but also their love for the church, and also their desire for integration and unity among Catholics of all color. So, but Tolton was, I think, less optimistic and was treated much more poorly than Rudd. If Rudd was treated poorly, he didn't talk about that so much. I feel like we might have lost our Zoom. Would you want to text? I don't know when our internet dropped off here, but
I'm still here.
oh, okay, good. Okay, got it. I thought we lost you.
No,
Okay.
I'm loving it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for speaking up, Kate. Okay, good. Good. It wasn't the internet. Okay, so this is a common line that he says all the time: the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Women, that comes later, but this was his focus. The Catholic Church takes men from all walks of life, and if they but follow her examples and teachings, she will not only place them beyond the railings, which meant ordained them. That's why he said this in relationship to Augustus Tolton. She'll place them beyond the railings, but she will guarantee them sure footing and endless happiness in the world beyond the grave. So he recognized the church as like drawing people to herself and drawing Augustus Tolton beyond the railing to be a priest, and just felt the wisdom of the church in that. This is a picture of St. Monica's Catholic Church in its building process. This church is the church that Augustus Tolton was building, because when he was ordained as a priest, he was ministering in Chicago to people of color in the basement of a church. And he wanted to, at least for his congregation of Black Catholics, to have their own church. So this is what he was raising money for. And it's called St. Monica's, which you might guess it's because St. Augustine was from Africa, and his mother was also from Africa. So that they, whether it's portrayed in art or not, I think we're beginning to acknowledge were probably Black. They were Africans. So St. Monica's, the first African-American church in Chicago, was constructed by Augustus Tolton with funds he raised. And unfortunately, it has been torn down now. I was listening to an article that said there's a little plaque in the middle of a park where he used to sit. Yes, so the congregation, there's no longer congregation there, but that's what Tolton was raising money for when he ran into Rudd. All right. The head of the church in the United States was Cardinal James Gibbons. He was in Baltimore, but he really supported Rudd's efforts. He admired him. He loved the paper, and he invited Rudd to be a member of a planning team for the first Congress of Lay Catholics in 1883. There's only 3 people on that planning team, and he was one of them. So Cardinal Gibbons recognized the value of Black Catholics, and Rudd especially. I have all the people in the country. He was on the planning team for the Congress of Lay Catholics. Okay, and Cardinal Gibbons actually spoke at the first Catholic Congress, which we're going to talk about now. So I think because Rudd was working with Cardinal Gibbons on this national Congress for lay Catholics, not white and Black, all colors, and that, like this, just for lay Catholics, Rudd got the idea, why not a Congress for Black Catholics? And so he started to work on this idea. He proposed it in his paper, the Act, American Catholic Tribune. And he said, of course, we know all of this because he printed it. The proposed Congress is intended to awaken the Negro Catholic to a sense of his duty. Important questions will be submitted and discussed. We must work ourselves if we expect to accomplish anything. The colored man is naturally religious. He believes, but faith without good works will not save us, say the doctors of the church. Let us be up and doing. Okay? And so we see him developing this idea through his writings of the social gospel, which we would now say Catholic social teaching. But the idea that the gospel has more to do with our lives than it's not just about what we do in the church building. And he was noticing and paying attention to structural sin, which we'll see is addressed in the National Black Catholic Congresses. So, but here we see him saying, we've got to get to work. And I think he was referring to both of these things. Okay, so he founded the first National Black Catholic Congress, and the first one was in 1889. He envisioned Catholics from across the country, Black men and women, probably mostly men, coming to this Congress to have a discussion about what does it mean to be a Black Catholic in the United States in this post-Reconstruction world, because by then we're starting to see Jim Crow laws unwind the Reconstructionist policies. How do we live? And so he said, we have to meet so that the church will know the number of Black Catholics and bring them out of hiding. In other words, if we all meet, people are going to see there's lots of Catholics in this church, and they're doing things, and we got to pay attention to that. He said, we want Black Catholics to get to know one another, not just sit in a pew by themselves at the back of church. And he said, after all, the Germans had a Catholic Congress and the Irish already had one too, so why can't we? And so he said, I want the church to know the strength of our Catholic Church and of the Black Catholics in the church. So this first Congress took place in January of 1889. A tremendous thing, don't you think? A monumental thing. In Washington, D.C., and Archbishop Elder, who was the Bishop of Cincinnati, was a speaker, and so was Cardinal Gibbons. So this was not just some little, like, let's have a few Black Catholics meet in the corner at a cafe or something. This was nationally known and recognized. Big name people were speaking there. And Augustus Tolton celebrated Mass. Yes.
Does anybody have any recollection of how many people were there? Came?
I am sure that we have some record. I have a record of the second Congress. I think there were like 5,000 people there.
Really?
So, but we have pictures of this, of at least some of the leaders in this group. So I suspect that there were a few hundred at this first one. You know how a movement has to grow. Yeah. So, but it wasn't just, again, 10 people in a coffee shop. There were a lot of people, and I think at the peak 5,000 at maybe the third one or the second. But let's see. Okay, so here's the picture, and this is, obviously some of the leaders and they're all men, of course, but they had recommendations for education for Black children, temperance, because people were complaining that, or saying that, the Black race, they're always drunk. I mean, remember, this is the kind of thing that white people will be saying about Black people. So they're talking about temperance, try to get labor unions to admit people of color so that they could have a job, and to try to keep, to work on discrimination in housing, and to build orphanages, hospitals, and asylums that could care for the needs of poor and indigenous children. Okay, so indigent children. Thank you. So, they were looking at not just like, let's have a Catholic conference and talk about Catholic things. This was about how can we address the issues of the people of color in this day and raise them to proper living standards and acknowledgement as people.
Rita, do you know if in addition to the speakers, there were other people who attended who were white in support of the Black Congress?
There were, Elder and Gibbons were both white. There were white people invited, and I do not know how, I don't have information of how many there were, but his newspaper was circulating among Black and white. So I suspect that there were some white people, but this looks like it's mainly, I don't know, maybe that's a good number of the people, but here's the photo we have. Okay, that same year in let me see if I got that right. Yeah, yes, I thought that was right. In 1889, there was this Catholic Lay Congress, which was the one that he originally was invited to help with when he got the idea for a Black Catholic Congress. So he was one of the three in leadership. Archbishop Ireland, who was the Archbishop of Minnesota at the time, he at the conclusion of the Baltimore Congress, and it was in Baltimore, he said he hoped that the laity's potential would be recognized. There's so much talent, there's so much strong faith. Now, I love that this connection is made, because look, 75 years later, Vatican II and the recognition of the role of the laity. But here it is in Baltimore in 1889. And Daniel Rudd was a part of that vision, not just for Black Catholics, but for lay people to be a part of the church. All right, let's see how we're doing here. This is John Mackey, and he was the rector of St. Peter and James Cathedral in Cincinnati. That was my cathedral when I lived in Cincinnati, and he was actually an associate editor of ACT. And so in Cincinnati hosted the second of these national Black Catholic congresses, and that was in 1880. So can you imagine? Daniel Rudd he was putting on a congress in 1889 January, and then in the fall of 1889 the Catholic Lay Congress, and now it's the January of 1890, and he's already doing another congress. Man, he's ambitious and he's passionate. And at the second Black Congress, and there was a call for schooling and for training for Black children and teenagers so that they could work. And then civil rights, housing, and labor unions. All of these things are things that are not just church related, but they're part of the life of people of color in the United States. And they were attending to this. So this wasn't just like, let's teach people how to pray. And then here's sorry, that's the third, that's still the third or the second one in Cincinnati. And I've been trying to see where Rudd is in this, but I don't exactly recognize him. So small.
Is it all men in that picture too?
It's still all men.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a well-dressed clergy. Okay, so the third was in Philadelphia, and here's another group picture, which is all men, and so you can imagine that by 1892, this is the year after Rerum Novarum comes out, there's a big discussion about Rerum Novarum at this Congress and the rights of people and to work. And at that time, they started to talk about, we should make this not just a club that we meet every so many years, but an organization. And they tried to draft a constitution for that. That didn't happen at this time. But the dream came true in 1985 when the National Black Catholic Congress was established, which now is it's an ongoing organization. So Rudd's dream did come true. It just not in his time.
Rita, do you see Rudd in that photo?
I have not been, I think he's right there, but I'm not sure because it's so small. Yeah, I'm not sure. And they're fuzzy too. So there was another Black Catholic Congress in Chicago, 1984, and discrimination within Catholic schools was discussed. And I think this is a difficult subject. The repatriation of Black people to Africa. That was a movement in our country after Reconstruction, when the Jim Crow laws is to say, look, let's just send these people back to Africa. That's where they're from. And it's hard to imagine how anybody could say, let's just get them all out of the country now. Well, maybe I can't, or maybe we could imagine that today, couldn't we? Let's just get them all out of the country. But remember that.
Same today.
Remember that the people who had been enslaved had not been in Africa in their whole lifetime. Yeah. And in fact, this book that I just read about the Clotilda, which was the last slave ship that brought enslaved people to the United States in 1859, the people who they brought from Benin could not speak to the people who were enslaved and didn't understand anything about their culture. The people who were enslaved on the plantations didn't understand. I mean, like, these are people who lived in our country, in the United States, and they didn't have any connection with a previous generation. But this was a part of what they were taught. How do we address this issue? Of course, to not to send people back, but to address the issue of who was talking about that.
Yeah, and I believe that ship that was sent, it was already illegal to
It
do,
was.
It was illegal.
and so that's why they burn it,
Yeah.
to hide the evidence.
Yeah, and that was in Mobile, the same place where he went and said, "Hey, everybody's so nice here." Okay, so Chicago, and I just want to remind you that it wasn't that long after that that the Chicago World's Fair was held here. So this is a show place, and the Congress wasn't held at the Field Museum, by the way, but that's the picture I have, because I don't have a document that shows where it was held. So that was built at the time. I mean, that was built for the Chicago World's Fair. And then the last one was in Baltimore, and it was at St. Peter Claver Hall. And the president of the assembly said, "We hope to hail the day when the American people, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church and the laity, shall rise up in all their might and stamp out the prejudice which is today destroying the lifeblood of the country." So this is not a Catholic problem. It's a problem of our country. We have to do something about this. And I think, just as an aside, Johnny, you might know this, but the Knights of Peter Claver was founded right after this in Baltimore. Right, like the hall was named for him, and then the organization was founded like 1901, right?
1909.
1909. Just wanted to mention this other aside, and that's that the Josephites were founded as a religious order to serve the people who had been enslaved, the previously enslaved people. And it was founded in England, but it was founded to for people to come to the United States and work specifically with previously enslaved people. And so that was in 1871, but it was actually at the in 1893 that it was finally accepted as an independent organization. And John Slattery was the first superior general. He had a deep relationship with Rudd as well. So Rudd knew all of these people. So these were people, white people coming to the United States to serve the needs of Black people, but also to begin to build seminaries and schools and places where Black children could be educated and men could be trained for ordination. And one more quote from Daniel about his wonderful version. "There's an awakening among some people to the fact that the Catholic Church is not only a warm and true friend to the people of color, but is absolutely impartial in recognizing them as equals of all and any other nation and races of men before her altars. Whether priest or layman, they are equals, all within the fold." Wowie, can you imagine that? He's not just seeing the equality of people of all colors, but priests and laymen, they're all equals. It touches me, the vision that he has, and that if only we were able to bring that to fruition, and we're 100 years more past his saying that. In 1893, Rudd moved his paper to Detroit. And after 1897, he wasn't publishing anymore. So was the newspaper losing its circulation? Was it past its time? Had something happened to him? we don't know what went on. But there's no census that lists him anywhere from 1898 until 1910. So what happened to him? I don't know what happened to him, but it seems that his discouragement must have been what drowned him in this sense of isolation. And let's see. Two things I'll just mention that Rudd might have found deeply discouraging and might have said, it's not worth it. Let me sell this printing press. Let me stop printing. He might have just had enough of that rooting for a team that was not rooting for him all the time. So this is Pope Leo the 13th, and I'm sad to say that he issued a letter. There was a circumstance that went on with a book by a priest, a French priest, and so he issued this letter. And one of the things he rejected, which I think is probably a good thing that he rejected, that's called American particularism, which was something going around that said, in the United States, we have been associating with Protestants. We're such a small population. We should be given some leeway to practice our faith in an American way rather than the way the church is. Because after all, we're out here in the wilderness with all the Protestants. Pope Leo said, oh no, no, the Catholic Church is what it is wherever it is. So that, he wanted to stamp that out. And I think it was also like the Americans think this idea of individualism, we can pull ourselves up by our boots and we can do all this stuff, that kind of thing that perhaps, I think that today our church might also say that there's a particular brand of Catholicism that's American. Would you think that? Of course, we all have our, every nationality has its particular way of embracing the faith, but I think as Americans, we tend to think we can do it better and maybe bigger, and perhaps that, and I think we might even see that in our church today, like based on some of the arguments around migration. Although Catholics don't have to do it this way, whatever that is. I guess I'm just saying that was happening, but there was also some discussion around the press that had printed this book that advocated for American particularism. And so he sounded like he was kind of squashing some of the freedom of the press. And that the document in here says, these dangers vis-a-vis the confounding license with liberty. Do we take license with liberty in our country? The passion for discussing and pouring contempt upon any possible subject. Yikes, doesn't that sound like today? The assumed right to hold whatever opinions one pleases upon any subject and to set them forth in print for the world have so wrapped minds in darkness that there is now a greater need of the church's leading teaching office than ever before, lest people become unmindful both of conscience and duty. I think that Rudd heard this. I think he started to I think he was exhausted, and here's more commentary. And I think he started to feel, and on top of that, I think Jim Crow, and that's, might already know, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. This is where the doctrine of separate but equal came. And that was not overturned until Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. So separate but equal meant that in the South especially, but even in the North, there's a school for Black people, a school for white people. There's a bathroom for Black people, a bathroom for white people. There's a cafe for Black people, a cafe for white people. You know the history of that. And I think that even in the documents I've read, even in that, there were people in the church who said, okay, that's probably better. Let's start building some schools for Black kids, you know, because they're not going to go, you know, and I think that in some ways, at least some, maybe many Catholics became complicit in this idea of Jim Crow. And I think that might have been also discouraging. So around 1910, he shows up in a census in Bolivar County, Mississippi, way down here along the Mississippi River. And he was working for a lumber mill at the time. Now, you might say, well, that's weird. He was an editor of a paper. Why would he think of all the mechanical things he needed to know to print something? That engineering background. And then he eventually was hired by a Black man who had a gravel and construction company, and he worked for him for a good part of his life. His son, Scott Bond, is the person who hired him. Scott Bond's son was writing a biography of his dad, and we know that that Daniel Rudd helped with that and helped to get that published. And then he moved for some reason to Arkansas, which is right across the river from Memphis, and worked for another man who was a Black farmer. And, you know, maybe he just worked on the farm, helped manage things. He just needed a break. Maybe his heart was broken. When he was in Arkansas, he the bishop there was John Morris, and he was building orphanages and schools and seminaries, but separate. But that was the bishop of Rudd's diocese. And Rudd did reach out to him. I mean, he was trying to provide for people of color, but that's separate. So Rudd actually asked if he could attend the Black Catholic Laymen's Convention in 1920, and he was turned down by the bishop. I know. The conference that he founded, and the excuse is there's not enough Black people in this county to justify sending someone. Morris did invite him to come to a Eucharistic Congress in Chicago, but it sounds like Rudd might have been sick. He wasn't able to travel by that time. So but this is not what he imagined the church to be. And I think that he was brokenhearted. He had a stroke in 1932, and then he went back to Bardstown, and that's where he died in 1933. Here's his grave right here, just a small, modest grave. But now this plaque sits over top of the grave, which says, Daniel Rudd, Catholic publisher, teacher, visionary. Catholic first, of course, publisher, teacher, visionary. He was never married, and it doesn't sound like he had much association with any of his siblings either. And that might be because some of them were split up in that inheritance, but then he moved away from Bardstown, although he moved back there, so there must be something about that drew him back, and maybe it was the love he had for that church, and that felt like home. This is in Springfield, Ohio. Historic marker says Daniel Rudd, layman of faith and action. And with our time almost up, let me just say, the civil rights movement in the United States began to generate in our Catholic Church Black Catholics who wanted to build a movement. And I'm just going to mention this very famous, I'm not going to play this, but this very famous speech of Thea Bowman to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, where she says, I bring my whole self, my whole Black self, my body, my soul, my faith, all of that I bring to my church. And I want to be heard in that way. It's a beautiful speech. It's part of Black Catholic history in the United States. It's a mile marker that she was asked to and spoke. The development of Black Catholic hymnals and liturgical. There's been a couple of documents on race by the USCCB, Brothers and Sisters to Us All, and Open Wide Our Hearts. And there's also there's a document by Black Catholic bishops that has been released during the same time, like in the 2000 teens. And just as a final thing, look at this. The National Black Catholic Congress was revived. Okay, Rudd's dream is continuing, and the last conference was in 2023, and the next one's in 2028. I'm just gonna. I think that the conference, the Black Catholic Conference, has established a Daniel Rudd Fund to provide grants to organizations involved in ministry to Black Catholics. So his name is here with us today, and his work is still here. So, and yay for Daniel Rudd, a man with a holy Catholic vision, which we are still trying to live. Yeah. And I'll just say that the best resources for him, Gary Agee wrote a thesis on him and then turned it into a book. His first book was A Cry for Justice. This one is a smaller book that was that was printed just recently, and he just published another book called That We May Be One, Practicing Unity in a Divided Church. So if you want to know about Daniel Rudd, this little tiny book has plenty of information.
Just this morning, Lit Press sent out a notice on that. It sent out a notice on all of its books on Black Catholics, because I think November is like Black Catholic month or something. So that they just sent that out this morning. It's
yay for Daniel Rudd. He's my inspiration now. And I am going to stop sharing. And Kate, thanks for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll stop for questions now. Stop